Jean Granelles met Bernard Rifkin in the 1950s. While most of her childhood friends had settled for a conventional life of domesticity, she pursued a college education. After meeting her husband, Ben, she accompanied him to Oklahoma Agricultural and Mechanical College, which is now called Oklahoma State University. Jean took graduate courses in education and eventually taught an art class there, while Ben received a degree in architectural engineering. Both of them were native New Yorkers, which is where they settled after completing their studies in the early 50s. They leased an apartment in the Bronx and planned to start a family, but due to medical reasons, Jean could not hold a pregnancy all the way. So, in late 1958, when Jean was 36 and Ben was 40, they were approved for an adoption by the Louise Wise Services in Manhattan, an agency that specialized in placing Jewish children with Jewish families. And although Jean was not Jewish by birth, she converted to Judaism after marrying Ben. Before long, they were presented with a baby boy who weighed 8 pounds, 6 ounces when he was born 3 weeks earlier, on January 20th, 1959. His biological mother was a 20-year-old student. His father, her 26-year-old boyfriend, a student as well as an army veteran. The Rifkins named their bundle of joy Joel David. As happy a time as it was, Ben felt great sadness over the fact that his mother died less than a year earlier and missed meeting her first grandchild. But the family soon moved into a brand new home in Rockland County, a northern suburb of New York City. Within 2 years, they adopted a second child, a girl born to different biological parents, whom they named Jan. Rockland County was extremely rural back then, and Joel remembers leading a Mark Twain-like existence that was mostly filled with happiness. The happiest period of my life keeps going back to Rockland County, he later explained. The beginning of my conscious memory, when I was 4, we had a very open backyard, maybe a half an acre, surrounded by woods on both sides, across the street and behind us. So I had my frogs to play with, my tadpoles and newts, whatever crawled in the woods, that was my toy. That was before anybody really started getting abusive, so that was a great time. It was also, he recalls, the only time he ever felt like an accepted member of a group. I remember the woods, the frog pond, and that whole bit, he said. I remember there was this drainage ditch, and I took my troop of friends and decided to go wandering down this drainage ditch. We saw a housing development down at the other end of this drainage ditch, and we came back. We didn't know that we were gone for an hour or 2, maybe 3 hours. We had every parent in the neighborhood freaking out. I was more confident back then, I guess, and I went to nursery school with the same bunch of kids, and I didn't have that many problems. Just before Joel started kindergarten, the family moved to East Meadow on Long Island, after Ben landed a job with an architectural firm named Thompson & Zark. The move would prove to be devastating to young Joel, who still refers to the times before the move and after the move as comparative periods of great joy and immense pain in his life. Because of my birthday, I had to wait a year to go to school, he recalled. I didn't make the cutoff for the district, and there weren't that many kids my age. I went from having a lot of kids my age to practically none. The older kids would play stick ball out on the curb, but I didn't have the coordination to join in. The only kid my age was my direct neighbor. They let him play all the time because he happened to be an athlete. That neighbor turned out to be the single most constant reminder of everything Joel was not. He was the exact opposite of Joel in every way. He could whack a Spalding for 10 hours straight, so he was always playing with the older kids, Joel recalled. He was the athlete, I wasn't. He was socially popular, I wasn't. He played with kids in the street, which I couldn't. He was president of the school. I went to Nassau Community College, he went to Princeton. The complete opposite, total. To make matters worse, throughout their entire school career they almost always sat next to each other in homeroom, because their last names were so close in alphabetical order. Jean watched helplessly from inside the house. Joel would sit on the curb to play ball with the other kids, but they wouldn't let him play. He would then retreat upstairs and watch out the window. She desperately wanted to approach the insensitive kids and demand that they include her son in their games, but she knew that would only add to the grief he was already experiencing. How could I go to the kids and say, "Let him play," she wondered. He would never be able to live that down. As young as 6 years old, Joel would excitedly anticipate rock and fossil expeditions, where he unearthed, among other things, chalk, clay, coal, coral, sandstone, limestone, and basalt. All of these items were proudly showcased in his room, giving a visitor the impression that he wanted to be an archaeologist or a professor someday. He also loved to disperse seeds throughout the yard, as well as anything to do with fossils. At the Museum of Natural History, curiously, Joel could spell plant names in Latin, but not in English. Jean was even more ecstatic when her son developed an interest in photography. "It was thrilling for me, absolutely," she recalled. "And I used to let him use the dark room, even encouraged him to use it, and he has never been the neatest person." He had a great eye for composition and was good at so many things, but never took anything far enough. He was great at starting things, but never finishing them. I couldn't understand why. By 1967, he began taking a formal interest in photography and handcrafts. He remembers telling his first grade teacher that he wanted to write a book, even though his dyslexia caused an array of embarrassing problems with both reading and writing. Writing was the only task he could think of that would allow him always to be alone. He began hiding himself in places where he could not be found, and developed a fantasy life that lasted well into adulthood. When Joel started kindergarten, he already felt like a misfit because of his lack of both athletic ability and self-confidence. Besides suffering from undiagnosed dyslexia that impaired his ability to read, he would often stutter when beginning to speak. His mind would wander in mid-sentence, and it was difficult for him to follow simple instructions. Although it was later determined that he had an IQ well above average, many people meeting him for the first time believed that he was mentally impaired. His feelings of inadequacy only intensified when he attracted the attention of a class bully, who he believes dramatically changed the direction of his life. In my kindergarten class, there was one guy who would have been inside the prison system ahead of me, but he ended up dying in a motorcycle accident, said Joel. He was completely out of control. Because of him, I then had a reputation that invited other guys to join in. If you wanted to establish your reputation as a tough guy, I was the guy you looked for. So I just created a nice little secret life for myself. I didn't hang out with other kids. I had very few friends. Causing Joel even more grief were his always growing feelings of incompetence around his father. My father was an athlete as a child, Joel recalled. If he had the grades under today's situation, he would have been a college player in football. Those were the days when quarterbacks were more like running backs, and you played both sides. No face mask and leather helmet type stuff. He wanted to take the baseball and the football out and play with his kid in the street. I had as much chance of catching the ball with my face as I did with my hands. I was terrible. Ben's frustration extended to math. He loved numbers almost as much as he loved sports, and was equally adept at both. He would spend hours working with his son, but eventually grew infuriated at his inability to grasp the rudiments. It irked him that he could do these crazy math things and I could not, said Joel. These were back in the slide rule days. It took him a while to adapt to little handheld calculators, but you could give him a 9-digit series and come back to him 10 minutes later, and he'd give it back to you. He could give it back to you backwards if you wanted. He could do mathematical equations and word problems in his head. Me, I couldn't memorize a multiplication table. There would be many nights where he'd sit with me and we'd go over and over it, and he'd get frustrated and have to walk away. He finally just gave up. Ben's frustration only made Joel feel more and more like a colossal disappointment, the disenfranchised son of a man he perceived to be a genius. Neither parent ever slapped Joel with the burden of being adopted, and they always thought of him as their son. They did not even tell him he was adopted until he was 11 years old. Ben went to the school and talked to the principals and administrators, but as Joel recalled, the 60s really weren't set up for children with special needs. There would be a special classroom for grades 6 through 12 for what were called the oddballs. Jean noticed that Joel was unable to interpret the facial expressions and body language of others. He never seemed to be aware that people were angry or annoyed with him, she said. He would do anything for attention, even if it was negative attention. In the early 70s, Ben was the vice president of the East Meadow School Board, as well as a trustee of the town's public library, where a sunlit atrium is dedicated to him. Joel saw his father as a mountain of a man who could hold his own in any physical, social, or intellectual arena. He could walk into a room and light it up, he recalled. He was very gregarious, I guess that's the word, always giving big hugs and pats on the back. One of the things Joel always admired about Ben was his refusal to glorify violence, even though he experienced plenty of it during World War II. While many of Ben's more macho friends regularly regaled an impressionable Joel with tales of bloodshed on the battlefield, Joel worshipped his father for not trying to get mileage out of his days as a foot soldier in the European theatre. I know guys who were World War II veterans who would go to the VFW, sit around, kick back, and tell stories of the war like that was the only time they felt alive, said Joel. And Dad would never talk about the war. Even as a kid, I would say, "Daddy, tell me a story." His war stories were all non-combat stories. He never told me about all the kids he saw getting blown up. Ben's favourite story was the one when he, a sergeant, and his driver were going through a short tunnel when they encountered another vehicle coming in the opposite direction. As they crossed paths, the occupants of both jeeps, one German, one American, realized they had just passed the enemy. They all did double takes and kept going. No one became a hero and turned around and chased. Although Joel's parents were well aware of his adjustment problems, they were oblivious of the degree of abuse their son endured at the hands of others. Jean remembers only one time when Joel came home from elementary school visibly upset. He was in the 4th or 5th grade. He was red in the face and said he had been waylaid on the way home, she recalled. The kids pulled his underwear off. My husband wanted to go to the school, but Joel begged him not to. My husband took care of it by talking to the parents of the bullies, and that group never bothered Joel again. While that group might not have bothered him again, there were plenty of others to take their place. Joel devised a strategy to avoid his confrontational classmates, but it only sent him deeper into his own little world. The building formed an H, and there were 2 entrances with a walkway across, he said. We had to line up, and our line went this way, and the older kids' line went that way. I used to be terrified to get on the line, so I used to time it, so I would walk up the block as everyone was going in. I'd get later and later, then start walking in a few minutes late. Although now safe from his tormentors for at least a few hours, he would immediately begin worrying about how to get home safely. In grade school there is not much to do, but I would clean the fish tank in the principal's office, clean the erasers, whatever, staying in the school long after all the other students went home. Joel also tried to compensate for being such a social and athletic failure by choosing to stand out in his own way. Now kids use backpacks. I started out with my grandfather's backpack. It started to fall apart, so I switched to a suitcase of all stupid things. I'm walking around with a little brown and tan suitcase. He ran for student body vice president in junior high school. I guess I wanted attention. I mean, the whole election was a popularity contest. I think I got 20 votes or something like that. He also took elective violin lessons, even though drums were all the rage. Here I am walking around with a violin case, and you just don't walk around as a guy with a violin case in school if you don't want to attract all the bullies of the world, he said. At that stage of his life, Joel differed greatly from his sister Jan, who was much more socially adjusted, had a good group of emotionally healthy friends, and according to her mother, was more adept at gauging other people's feelings towards her. He was a very shy child, fairly awkward around other children, and from the moment he enrolled in school, Rifkin's life became one of constant teasing, bullying, and abuse by his peers. Upon Rifkin's attendance at East Meadow High School, things deteriorated even further. His grades were terrible, which his father found embarrassing, and Ben apparently yelled at Rifkin, asking him why he couldn't do anything to please his father. His mother, Jean, was fairly oblivious to the bullying Rifkin had been suffering, and believed he was just a bit of a loner. Already a target for bullies, Rifkin's own attire and manner made him even more of a soft touch at high school. He looked like the typical nerd of that era, with his pants pulled up high, his white socks showing above his shoes, and his glasses. One of the people who bullied Rifkin later referred to him as an abuse unit. That although he didn't do anything to bring about the unwanted attention, his sheer presence seemed to annoy people. Joel joined the track team in high school and hoped that by doing so he could erase many of his past humiliations, as well as garner some much-desired appreciation from his father and his peers. "I learned if you fought back, you got beaten worse," he said. "I'd take the public pummeling and go down. The guy would be satisfied, his manhood intact. I knew who my enemies were because they were all on the track team. If you join a gang, then no one else can touch you." Things started off fine, and Joel enjoyed what he thought was a brief period of comfort and camaraderie among his teammates. But it did not take long for things to deteriorate. Getting his head dunked into a toilet bowl or a dead chicken stuffed in his mouth were just some of the things he endured. At one point he developed what he thought was a mutually caring relationship with a sensitive female teammate. Her older brother, the star of the team, did not share his sister's sensitivity and decided to have a little fun at Joel's expense. "I stopped by the house to pick her up once," he recalled. Big brother decides to do the old check out the boyfriend routine, even though he knows me from the team. So while he is asking 21 questions, he is cleaning a shotgun. He is rubbing it and brushing it, the whole bit. Joel gulped hard when the boy said, "Don't hurt my sister," as he clicked and pumped the weapon. I was like, "Gee, nice and subtle message," recounted Joel laughingly, although he is the first to admit he wasn't laughing at the time. Once the rest of the team got wind of the relationship, the games really began. One day, Joel was working hard at his part-time job at the public library and was eagerly looking forward to meeting his girlfriend afterward. Shortly before the end of his shift, a group of teammates armed with eggs and shaving cream converged on the building and immediately blocked all the exits. Like a cornered rabbit, his heart beating wildly, his eyes dashing furtively about, he realized he had to make a quick decision. He chose to call his father. "I decided to just have Dad pick me up, which was like a big sissy mistake," he said, as if still shouldering the ignominy of the experience a quarter of a century later. What was even more hurtful than the incident itself was the fact that his girlfriend, urged on by the crowd, was laughing heartily along with them. "I don't know if the whole thing with her from the beginning, day one, was a setup, or if it developed later on," he said. His tormentors also filled his gym bag with eggs and shaving cream before he left, his father, having witnessed so many similar occurrences, was unmoved. By that time it was normal, said Joel. He gave up trying. In grade school, up until a little of junior high school, he used to want to know who the kid was, and he would go talk to the father. A couple of times it would help, but mostly it would encourage it. The nickname Joel the Turtle stuck through those years, given largely because of the unusual way he walked with a sloping posture and his slow pace. He was also taunted on the track team with a new nickname, Lard Ass. This also led to him being excluded from participating in sports because none of his peers wanted to choose him for their team. He never did anything to warrant the attacks, they just selected him as the target of their nastiness. He suffered daily the brunt of horribly sadistic pranks and jokes, and regularly had his books and lunch stolen. There was also a locker incident during winter track season. Teammates were running in the building when they pinned Joel against a girl's locker he had a schoolboy crush on. One of the shot putters held him against it, and they take out this big, huge 1-inch magic marker, the graffiti type, and just covered the whole thing with her name, my name. A lot of 4-letter words. A lot of basic sexual remarks, said Rifkin. After practice ended, a mortified Joel located a custodian who supplied him with a foam cleaner that removed all the graffiti. He then found her number in the phone book and called her at home. I said I just wanted to let you know, in case they come in early and do something. I was seriously mad, and it takes a lot to get me mad. The girl thanked him for calling and told him things were still okay between them. What followed surprised him even more. I went on a little hunting party the next couple of days, he remembered. Basically, I found some of the guys who had done it, and we got into a yelling match, and a couple of them got pushed up against lockers. I basically said, you guys might be able to knock me out, hospitalize me, but I am going to hurt you. After that, he quit the track team and retreated back into his self-imposed isolation. It was like the only time I did something like that, where I took an affirmative, defensive step, he said. At a teenage leadership retreat at summer camp, he took advantage of the fact that nobody knew his personal history, and began boasting about how easy it was to ask someone for a date. Before he knew it, he found himself dared into doing just that. Much to his surprise, the girl happily agreed, and the two went to see a movie. Then they planned to attend a party for their second date. While riding their bicycles to the party, Joel, thinking a setup awaited him, began to panic. Terrified of being humiliated in front of a girl he actually liked, he adamantly refused to attend, even though they pedaled to within yards of the house. He painstakingly told her about the bet, but to this day does not know whether it was a setup or not, because he never mustered enough courage to go inside the house. She thought the whole date was a setup to use her, he recalled. She took it very badly, and I had no idea how to deal with it. At a party during the school year, he downed a few beers in order to loosen up and fit in. I make the mistake of telling the truth. There was this girl who was in all of the school plays. I sat in the row behind her in biology class, and I had this basic schoolboy crush on the girl, and she knew it. But she was dating some guy from a different school, so we just talked. I took her picture a few times for the yearbook, that kind of thing. That was the same girl whose locker became the target. On his first date, Joel arranged to go out with the girl in the track team, but the eggs and shaving foam incident happened. The second time Rifkin tried to go on a date, the bullies found them at a pizza parlor and chased them both down the street until Rifkin and his date were able to hide in the local library. By the time he started college, Rifkin had not maintained a relationship, much less asked anyone to be his girlfriend, or experienced a real romance. During his senior year, as a member of the yearbook committee, Joel was put in charge of taking most of the photos for the book. Jean was thrilled for him because she believed he might finally garner acceptance from his classmates. He took his job much more seriously than most of the other committee members and worked long hours taking snapshots, developing the film, and laying out the pages. When the book was finally brought in on schedule, because of Joel's efforts more than anyone else's, his fellow workers did not even invite him to the wrap party. Once again, he was the odd man out. He was just devastated. Absolutely devastated, said Jean. He was almost single-handedly responsible for that book being out on time, and they just dismissed him. He was always able to hide his pain in the past, but he couldn't hide the pain from that incident. He was heartbroken, and so was I. He graduated in 1977 at the bottom of the class, but he hoped that life would get better once he went to college. Because of his array of learning disabilities, Joel's grades were average at best, which caused a rift with his father over what educational path he would take. "Dad wanted me to go to community college," said Joel. "He was like, 'We will knock out the basic credits you need as cheaply as possible, and after a year or two there you will go somewhere else.' And he was firm on this." Every other kid is filling out applications to Brown and Stanford. They had these lists of colleges, and I had done no college research at all. Joel dutifully, but miserably, went off to Nassau Community College, feeling as much like an outcast as he always had. It was located just a few miles from his home, and it was not the place to reinvent himself. If you want to meet people and have a group of friends, community college is not the place to go, he explained. The period ends and the parking lot empties. There is no college life at all. Like so many of the other unfinished projects that would in many ways define him, Joel completed only one course at Nassau. That failure was only exacerbated by the forward strides his father made during the same period. Ben left his longtime employer to take a more prestigious, higher-paying position as a structural engineer at a national laboratory headquartered on Long Island. In the months prior to his departure for Brockport, Joel began patronizing prostitutes in Hempstead, a run-down town not far from his home, because he was determined to acquire sexual experience before arriving at college. Thinking everyone else his age had it, he didn't want to be known as the only virgin in the dormitory. For $20 he could speak to any woman he wanted, with no fear whatsoever of rejection. "The whole idea is, it's an assembly line," he explained. "There's no foreplay, it's get it over with as fast as we can, push all the right buttons, get him out of here in 2 minutes flat." It almost becomes habitual. In the fall of 1978, he transferred to SUNY Brockport, the State University of New York at Brockport, a suburb of Rochester. He joined the photography club and became a highly respected member of it. It was there, on October 26, 1979, that he was introduced to Robert Mladinich, a 22-year-old junior who just landed his first paying writing gig with a national boxing magazine called Hank Kaplan's Worldwide Boxing Digest. Mladinich needed a photographer to cover Rocky Fratto, an undefeated junior middleweight fighting at the Monroe County Dome Arena in Rochester, and raced to the school's journalism department for help. Within an hour, he was introduced to a rumpled, shaggy and bespectacled transfer student who whiled away most of his days in the well-equipped photography lab. Joel had equally ambitious dreams of being a photojournalist and was as thrilled as Mladinich was to get a jump start on his career. During the 30-minute drive to Rochester, the two quickly realized they had much in common. Although neither was particularly athletic, they were attending a school known most for its athletic excellence. They both hailed from Long Island and were both quintessential loners who had long ago escaped into solitary pursuits. Joel's being photography, Mladinich's being writing. Joel shared his hopes of taking up skydiving so he could make a living chronicling parachutists as they made their thrilling descents. "Joel Rifkin and I could not have gotten along better," Mladinich wrote. The fight ended in a disputed decision, and the arena erupted, Chairs were 6 deep in the ring. Fistfights broke out across the building. Joel initially sought refuge under the ring, but quickly realized that from a journalistic standpoint, valor took precedence over safety. He was soon amid the fray, firing away with his camera like a frontline war correspondent. After trying to hustle some of Joel's photos into the city's 2 daily newspapers, they headed back to Brockport in the wee hours of the morning, intoxicated by adrenaline and talking non-stop. Judging by the half-smile that never left Joel's face, it was obvious that he was equally charged, not only by his immense grace under fire, but by the respect I was according him as a colleague, Mladinich recalled. In the photography club, Joel's work earned genuine praise. I had professors, I had professionals tell me, this one's pretty good, the rest of them you can chuck. But yeah, you have an eye here, he said. He recalled a particular photograph taken at Brockport, a guy sunbathing leaning back on his skateboard, and the way the sweat and musculature was, it was a heck of a photo. I took it from above, and there were all these little patterns around him, but he couldn't accept the compliments. I always underrated my skills. I didn't have that self-esteem to say, yeah, I'm a good photographer. He became serious enough with a girl at Brockport to move in with her, but the relationship fell apart. I was basically seriously depressed by that time, he recalls. Medication probably would have helped me out in the world, but it wasn't around 20 years ago. The apartment looked like a tornado, and she got tired of living that way. I was sleeping all the time, just not functioning. She said, if you don't pass your subjects, if you don't get it together, I am going to rethink this whole relationship. What his girlfriend did not know was that Joel was leading a clandestine life, regularly travelling to Rochester to be with prostitutes. Going out on the streets was my little secret world, he recounted. That world never mixed with my normal everyday world unless I needed money and had to steal from the regular world to pay a bill, or if I was late for work. Their sex life also collapsed. I performed a little too fast, he recalled. I didn't realize it at the time, but patronizing prostitutes became a problem in my personal encounters. She was in an amorous mood one night, and she was looking for a night of romance, and I was Mr. Automatic. She never spoke to me about it, I found out later on. But that basically ended our sex life. It ended the relationship pretty much too. One particularly awkward incident with his Brockport girlfriend still resonated with him. We had gone to the mall and found one of these little antique fairs where people set up little card tables, and it is almost like a garage sale, he explained. We were walking around looking at some of the stuff, and there was this old photo of Teddy Roosevelt. I haggled the guy down to $16. I bought it and didn't think nothing of it. And she took it as we are low on money and we can't make the rent. How dare you spend $16 on this piece of garbage? So we had a little argument over that. And I'm sitting there, having just got money sent up from Mom and Dad to pay the rent, but knowing I had blown $35-40 the previous weekend on one of my little wanderings. He also suffered from recurring herpes attacks throughout his time at Brockport. Over the Brockport time, I'd get dime-sized and nickel-sized lesions that were incredibly painful, he recalled. I used to get them in the back of my throat, couldn't swallow. I would be drooling for 3 days, banked 104-degree temperature. Eventually I found a doctor in Brockport who treated the infection with penicillin and Tylenol with codeine. So I'd be asleep for 3 days, basically. He dropped out of college in 1980 and returned home. He had just broken up with his girlfriend, and it was career time. So he joined up with the parent company of Record World and worked in the warehouse for a little over a year. Then he went into the management training program. The Record World job brought its own torments. They didn't promote him on their own, he asked for it. The idea was simple. Go from assistant manager to manager, maybe to district supervisor. maybe transfer to another company. But he liked retail. The only thing that got in the way was doing the paperwork, a simple little daily report he couldn't handle. He had supervisors come in to work with him, had extra sessions with managers, sessions with his father, and still could not get the accounting skills to do the paperwork. Closing the store at night was its own particular terror. There are a few nights I remember that very bad feeling when they're turning off the lights, and we were in the exact middle of the circuit board. So the lights would race at you from the two sides, and at a point there was total darkness, and I'd be sitting there with the bank deposit bag and the safe open, watching the lights race toward me. Throwing everything in the safe, kicking it, spinning it, then running through the store with the lights out, because I was that late trying to do the bags. He then caught an employee stealing albums, wrote him up, only to be overruled by the union. An 18-year-old kid had more power than he had. That was the first real hard failure. He was getting physically ill. He believed he was having angina attacks. Eventually, he got fired for abuse of his own employee discount, having bought albums for a friend at Christmas. Joel moved back with his parents and returned to Nassau Community College, but his pattern of cutting classes continued, and he was seldom there. He left for the last time in 1984. Out of school, Rifkin worked a variety of jobs, but didn't last very long at any of them. Similar to college, he was constantly absent from work, his hygiene levels were poor, and he seemed inept at doing the simplest of tasks. One former employer even claimed Rifkin couldn't count to 10. When he wasn't working, he daydreamed a lot about one day becoming a poet or a famous writer, but any attempts to write always resulted in bleak or dark content. He moved out several times, but always returned to his parents' home when he lost a job. Throughout the early to mid-80s, Joel was perpetually unemployed and constantly at odds with his father. What little money he was able to sporadically scrape together doing odd jobs was spent on his regular forays into the streets. He also worked occasionally on an autobiographical screenplay called The Frosh, which chronicled his days as a freshman at Brockport. It was while immersed in that project that he met a woman named Catherine Mary Kelty. Joel says he met her on the East 12th Street stroll, but she told police they met in a Queen's pizzeria where she was working as a waitress. He passed himself off as a New York University student who just completed a screenplay. Kelty, who was about a decade older than Joel, fancied herself a writer and claimed she hired him to assist in a screenplay she was working on. Joel soon moved into the squalid West 49th Street apartment she was already sharing with another person. I spent about a month and a half there, he recalled. The guy who had it, his father passed away, and he moved in and didn't tell the landlord. I don't know if he was paying rent on it or not. The place was a general mess. The plumbing was always overflowing. Things got progressively worse when Kelty, whom he described as a prostitute and heavy drug user, became consumed by paranoia. I don't know if it was a real event or cocaine paranoia, but she thought that there was a dealer on the streets that was trying to kill her, he recalled. And I had to help her move, so I showed up one day with a car that I borrowed and moved her from this one squat to another squat. And then she wanted to know if I could hang out and follow her on her strolls, in case this guy showed up so I could at least scare him off by being a witness. She had a book of regulars and a ritual. New cheap stockings and a pint of Southern Comfort or Jack Daniels before going out every night. Although they had sex only once, right after their initial meeting, Joel had a strong crush on her. Things came to a halt for good after she stole a camera and over $2,000 in cash from his boot. She had to pay off a debt, and she was in the con where she was going to get out of town and go someplace else. And she did it real sweet, where I thought I had lost it, but she lifted it. When her photo was found in his room after his arrest, investigators were certain she was another yet-to-be-identified victim. She was tracked to a motel in Toms River, New Jersey. She said she fired him as her writing assistant because he wasn't doing anything, he was just sitting around. I couldn't stand to be around him. By that point in his life, Joel had a handful of childhood East Meadow friends with whom he played weekly games of pinochle and bridge right up until shortly before his arrest. Many of Joel's most normal and happy memories are of those times. Amazingly, Joel was able to walk on a high wire between both worlds without ever falling off. They would be as shocked as everyone else when it was later discovered what he had done. Some of the dating was after the card games, he admitted. As his friends got married one by one, it only deepened his sense of exclusion. I went to 2 of these weddings, and I got stress illness at both of them, he said. Not so bad at the first one, but at the second one, feverish. I couldn't move that day. I had 103 fever. Joel said that medication might have brought him out of his shell, but being such a loner, he couldn't bear the thought of seeking professional help. His parents brought him to a psychiatrist as a teenager, a memory he still found troubling. It's really hard to accept that you have a mental problem, he said. It's like, no, I don't have a problem. I'm just fine. I'm normal. A lot of the social anxiety disorder is not wanting to go to a psychiatrist either, because you just relate to him as another stranger. In the fall of 1986, Rifkin's father, Benjamin, was already suffering from emphysema when he was diagnosed with prostate cancer. Ben had an experimental chemotherapy pump affixed to his belt, through which medication flowed throughout the day. Joel would come home one Thursday night a week to lend moral support. Thursday night had a really intense TV lineup, and him and my mom would like to watch it from almost 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock, he recalled. So I would join them and spend the night with them, just to be with him, trying to be close. Unfortunately, as his illness progressed, I'd give him a hug goodbye, but he wouldn't hug back. His arms would just stay limp. Ben persuaded Joel, then 28, to take one class at the nearby State University of New York, at Farmingdale. He promised to pay for a full-time curriculum the following semester if Joel earned a B or better. I picked biology because biology was hard, but it wasn't as hard as math, Joel explained. We wanted a true test. I couldn't take reading or writing. I couldn't take art. It had to be a true test. This was the agreement, and I'm working like a fiend. I'm really stressing out and concentrating. Just before the midterm exam, Ben took a lethal combination of barbiturates, fell into a coma, and died 3 days later in February 1987. Joel received his grade, a 90, on the day before his father's death. The doctor said, "We think people can hear in a coma, so why don't you tell him how you did?" he recalled. I said, "Gee, Dad, I got a 90, isn't that great?" I still don't know if I drove him to an early death or if he was just tired of all the suffering. At the funeral, Joel's stirring eulogy began with the words, "My father didn't give me life, but he gave me love." Those words brought the mourners to tears. But other, more pervasive feelings were working hard to counteract his grief. Knowing how proud his father always wanted to be of his only son, and what a bitter disappointment he actually became, caused Joel incredible heartache. Many emotional issues were left in tatters by his father's death, and Joel spiraled into an emotional abyss, as the Mladinich source records it. The following year, Rifkin attended the State College of Technology in New York to study a 2-year horticulture program. Incredibly, he earned straight A's for 2 semesters, which resulted in him being chosen for an internship at Planting Fields Arboretum, located in Oyster Bay. It was a huge honor for Rifkin to be selected for the internship, and he was even more delighted to discover one of the other interns was a pretty blonde girl. He was attracted to her and would shadow her whenever he could, but he wasn't brave enough to ask her out on a date. In his mind, though, they were engaged in a fantasy affair. Rifkin became hugely frustrated when she showed no signs of being interested in him. On August 22, 1987, in between his father's illness and the horticulture program, Rifkin made the mistake of trying to solicit sex from the wrong woman. She turned out to be an undercover police officer, and he was arrested and fined. He was able to hide his arrest from his mother, and decided he would have to go further afield to pick up prostitutes so she would never know what he was up to. By that time, Joel's proclivity for prostitutes evolved into a full-blown compulsion. "I couldn't put 2 nickels together," he recalled. "I took a paycheck, and if I didn't pre-spend it, it would be gone by Monday. The whole focus of my life was the streets." He was ripped off at least a dozen times by different girls. Once, at the Hempstead Motel, a girl delayed proceedings until a knock came at the door. It flew open, and a man claiming to be her boyfriend grabbed her and pulled her from the room, along with Joel's money. "It was a timing thing," he said. "Now I understand why the delay." Another time on Atlantic Avenue in Brooklyn, 2 men claiming to be cops told him a girl said he had stolen $50 from her. He gave them $30 and they drove off. The same girl ripped him off twice using the same play, telling him she lived with her grandmother and pretending to go inside, then disappearing through the backyard. Both times, 6 months apart, she disappeared into the house and through the backyard. "I don't even know if she lived in that house," he said. But in the end, it was Joel who used his meek appearance and frazzled, harmless demeanor to pull off the ultimate con of all. His reign of terror began in March 1989. 2 years to the month after his father's death, he moved back in with his mother, who at the time was whitewater rafting in Colorado. His sister was living away from home. On the night of his inaugural killing, things started out in typical fashion for him. Joel left Long Island around 10 o'clock after watching an episode of Kojak on television. He headed into the city, as he had hundreds of times before, and murderous thoughts were dancing around in his head. He had no reason to think that this would be the night he would finally cross the line from fantasy into reality. He often thought about bringing prostitutes back home, but rarely had the chance. But this night was different. Still, he insists to this day that getting his first victim in the house was in no way part of a grander scheme to lure her to some private killing ground. Because he was perpetually nervous, easily spooked, and terrified of altering his life in any way, the thought of engaging in such a dangerous action was inconceivable to him. After all, by that time he estimates he had been with well over 300 sex workers, all of whom had been paid in full and left unharmed. While Rifkin did strangle most of his later victims, his very first victim, Heidi Bulch, whom he knew as Susie, was actually bludgeoned to death with a decommissioned military howitzer shell that he purchased at a flea market before he dismembered her. That strangulation fantasy was used to sometimes jazz the evening up just on a mental level, he said. "I'd been with a long string of streetwalkers, so there were even fantasy games just to perk that up, because even that got to be routine." When Rifkin was pulled over in June 1993 for a missing license plate, police discovered the body of his final victim, Tiffany Bresciani, in the back of his truck. Once in custody, Rifkin did not try to claim innocence or pin it on anyone else. During his initial interrogation, he immediately admitted to killing 17 women between 1989 and 1993. Joel the Turtle messed up for the last time, and thank God his father wasn't around anymore to witness it. It would have been a sad scene. If you are interested in the more detailed version of the events, I already have a video about it. I'll leave it here on the screen for you guys. I hope I earned your subscription today. Please leave a like on your way out. It helps a lot with the algorithm. Stay safe.